Hello and welcome to this module. Quite a short module, which again is strange considering how important it is. One of the reasons it's so short is I'm going to give you a very broad understanding of procurement and contract management, but the reality is you're going to be subject to the rules of your organization about procurement and the way that you put goods and services out for contracts and the types of contracts that you use. And you'll also be subject to the rules of your own country and the legal rules around contract administration. So that's why this particular module can't be too in depth, because it's going to be different according to your organization and your country. So what I'm going to be doing is just giving you a high level introduction to the concepts, the broad concepts of deciding whether or not to go outside the organization or the project to procure goods or services. And then if you do, the sorts of contracts that you could offer and what you should do to choose a successful contract. My goal is giving you the tools and techniques, a high level awareness of some of the tools and techniques that you need to successfully either buy or sell goods, because you can be either, by the way. You could be working on a project where you are looking to buy goods or services from others, or your project could be selling goods and services to someone else. So it doesn't matter which position you find yourself in as buyer or seller. And yes, you can have projects where you are both buying services from somebody else and selling services or products to somebody else. So whether you're buyer or seller, these rules all hold true, the general high level rules. So look, let's crack on. And again, with all the other modules, same rules apply. If you have any questions at all, feel free to drop me an email and I'll do my best to get back to you very promptly with it. Now, the real world, unfortunately, well, this is what I've seen is I've seen procurement practices which are just made up on the spot and done informally. I've seen procurement practices that have deliberately ignored organizational policies and the consequences of that. I've also seen people choose not to follow the defined processes because they think, oh, why do I need to go out to 3 vendors, or why do I need to follow this process? I just know somebody who will supply it. And I've seen the consequences for that too. So while this should be one of the most followed processes in the world of project management, it's often not. And the reason it should be the most followed process in project management, all the other processes, you're subject to your own internal guidance and the guidance from the PMO, maybe on the methodology, or your organization about the way projects should run. But this is one of the very few times in the world of project management that your decisions have legal consequences. And certainly your very bad decisions here could lead to, well, to be honest, lawyers getting new cars and bigger homes because you didn't really sit down and put the time into working out the right type of contract and then reading the type of contract. So I have a quick question for you before we start. Now, you know that contracts are legally enforceable, right? Yep. You know that you can end up in court or some sort of civil dispute as a result of not meeting the terms of a contract. So I have a question for you. Do you read every contract that you sign? Now, I'm assuming that you're probably nodding your head and going, of course I do. I read every contract that I sign, but I know you don't. That last software update on your phone, you know, the one that said, I've agreed to the terms and conditions. Did you read those terms and conditions? That last app you installed, the last bit of software update on your laptop, did you read those terms and conditions? I'm betting you didn't. If you did, you would be very surprised at what the terms and conditions say, particularly about who owns what and what rights of terminating your access to those bits of software and any compensation that you may be due, which is none, by the way. So you don't read those contracts. So sure, you're saying, well, I don't read those contracts. They're pages and pages and pages long. And obviously it's really difficult to imagine getting halfway through an update to your Apple iPhone and it asks you to accept the terms and conditions and you scroll through the terms and conditions. There's no real possibility that you're going to email Apple and say, listen, in terms of your terms and conditions, clause number 62.1.a, I'd like to renegotiate it. That just generally doesn't happen. But regardless of whether you can renegotiate it or not, you should be aware of the terms and conditions. So there's a bit of homework for you. But what about some other contracts that you may not have read? What about your insurance contracts, personal insurance, home or possessions or contents insurance, car insurance, health insurance? They're all contracts. Have you read those contracts? I'm guessing some of you now have read those, but I'm also guessing that you may not have. The thing about contracts is they're everywhere in our life, not just at work. So you do need to read all the contracts. As I said, you may not have the ability to renegotiate them, but you should at least be aware of the commitments that you are making to somebody. Just on that, I had a funny story just last week, in fact. Might as well share it with you. I had somebody around at my house to quote for a new air conditioning unit, a new heat pump. And they gave me the quote on the spot, which I thought was unusual, because normally people go away for a few days, and they said, we just want you to sign this bit of paper so we can get our inspectors around to give you the pre-inspection to make sure we can do it. And I said, the piece of paper is called a sale agreement, and it's got all these terms and conditions for sale and purchase. They said, no, it's not. It just says that, but it's not. We want you to authorize us sending around our inspectors. And I very clearly pointed out to them, it said sales agreement at the top, had all the standard conditions in it for payment terms. And in fact, it clearly said I couldn't cancel the contract unless it was in accordance with our local Fair Trading Act, when they clearly said, no, you can cancel it at any time. Needless to say, I cut short that conversation and asked them to leave, because that was really bad practice on their part, to claim that something clearly labelled as a sale and purchase agreement was not, and wanting me to sign it on the spot. And that was only because I read it, because I noticed that the salesperson had a large folder with probably at least 10 or 15 other agreements already signed. And it just got me thinking, how many other people have just gone, they told me that it was just authorizing the pre-inspection to come around, and I signed it. It was only because I read it and said, this is a sales agreement. And anyway, so that's just really important. Now, when it comes to the workplace, you have to read all the contracts, and you have to read them regularly. Don't just read them once. I have a policy that if I'm subject to any contracts, I'll read them monthly, so I'm aware of them, because you always forget particular terms about performance or termination or anything else like that. So please do read them regularly. So the world of procurement management and project management starts with a decision about what sort of goods, products, or services you need on the project, and whether or not you're going to do them yourself, build them yourself, or you're going to get them from an external source. That's the first decision you need to make. And once you've made that decision, and if you do decide to go outside the project or outside the organization and procure from an external source, then choosing the most appropriate type and form of contract to acquire these. Okay, so that's what it starts with. And that very first step of making that first decision, whether you're going to do it yourself or get it outside the organization, is called a make or buy analysis. And now, for some decisions, it may be absolutely crystal clear that you just do not have the skills, the experience, the time, the resources, whatever, to make it or build it yourself. And then obviously it makes perfect sense to go out and procure those goods or services from somebody else. But other things are much more nuanced and much more subtle. And you need to take into account some other factors, such as risk factors, the actual cost. And one of the big ones is intellectual property and who owns it. Now, this is one red flag to watch out for, particularly if you're procuring certain professional services or software development as well. Who actually owns what is produced? Because there's definitely a lot of different ways of looking at this, and you need to be aware of it and make sure that it's factored in. So you need to take into account, whether you've got the current skills and experience, how long it would take you to get them, whether you've got the current hardware or tools to produce it. Is it a short-term investment for you and you won't be able to ever do it again after this project, in which case it probably makes sense to get somebody else to do it. What's the risk in terms of people seeing how you work, commercial sensitivity, intellectual property, ownership? All of those things need to be taken into account. You'll also do market research. You'll go out there and figure out, well, who's actually in the market that can supply this? Is it a very competitive market, or is there maybe one or two players, and you're going to be paying through the nose because there really isn't true competition in the market too? And also about timing. If you're looking for a whole lot of business analysts, for example, because you don't have them and you don't have employment for the long term, are there BAs in the market at the moment, or project managers in the market at the moment, or software coders in the market at the moment? And if so, what are they charging? Because all of these factors will inform your decision about whether you should, in that instance, go out and employ people on salary and train them up, or go out and employ contractors as well. You'll also meet with your experts, the subject matter experts, like if you're particularly into construction and you want to go and procure a particular construction methodology, you'll talk with the engineers who are experts in that about the best things to get and what to be aware of. You'll make sure your team members and other stakeholders are aware of all of your decision making too. At the end of this process called make or buy analysis, you'll have your make or buy decisions. You'll have that list of goods that you've decided that on the balance of everything, you're going to do it internally. But you'll also have that list of goods and services that, after considering all of these factors, you've decided it makes more sense to go out to the market to get these goods and services. And there are pros and cons with outsourcing work. It's not just a simple matter. So obviously, in terms of some of the advantages, there can be a cost reduction if it would cost you too much to get those skills or to upskill people or to buy the hardware or whatever. So it can just be cheaper for you if it's a one-off cost for your project. It can also lead to faster project completion. The schedule moves along faster because you can get those resources now, or that thing now, rather than having to build it yourself and divert people away from other work. You can also contract in immediately a high level of expertise rather than trying to build it yourself over time. And it does give you some flexibility, particularly if you just need things for short-term engagement. So you only need, electricians for 3 months on a 2-year project, or you only need software developers or a particular type of software developer at the beginning of the project or the middle of the project. So you've got flexibility there. You don't have to commit to employing people long-term or buying machinery that at the end you have to dispose of. But some of the disadvantages too of outsourcing work are you can lead to a breakdown in coordination over the project, because all of a sudden now you're having to manage multiple vendors and their product or service has to arrive or turn up or be completed at the right time so it doesn't affect other project work. So all of a sudden coordinating all of these external people with their own processes, their own organizational culture, their own level of project management maturity, all comes into it and increases risk. You may experience a loss of control. They'll tell you when they're going to deliver it. They'll tell you what their constraints are. And if they change their mind, there's not much you can do about it. You can renegotiate the contract or try some punitive actions on them, but you can lose control once it's outside. As I mentioned before, one of the other disadvantages can be ownership. Who actually owns it? Particularly with things like software plans, even architectural plans, who owns the plans? Software development, who actually owns the code at the end of it? And a simple story to illustrate the point is, if you've ever had professional photographs taken by a professional photographer, the default position is that the photographer owns the photos and only lets you use them for certain purposes. You could also have conflict because now you're dealing with another organization. They've got their own culture, their own ways of working. They may not be invested in the project success. They may be interested in maximizing their profit, and there's all sorts of issues around that. You've got security issues. You're obviously giving people access to your project, your IT systems, all sorts of things like that. So there might be a fear of losing competitive advantage. And obviously, we see this a lot, political hot potato. Your outsourcing decisions could come back and bite you if they don't perform and you get the blame, not them. Or if there's any form of political cronyism or nepotism involved. You often see local and central government, being blamed for the decisions of the contracting decisions they make. So do keep that in mind. It's not just a simple clear-cut, outsourcing work is always better or always worse. There are pros and cons, but successfully managing it is the key to getting the best out of it. Now, before we go any further, before we get into the process of looking at the different types of contracts, I just want you to think about your organization's procurement policies because they're going to be really important now. You do need to follow your organization's procurement policies. It may be that you've got a separate procurement department, in which case you need to go and chat with them. Okay, you need to follow out what your find out what your processes are, how you go out, what your rules are, how your decision making, how your justification is. So please, whatever you do, go and talk with your procurement department, or if you don't have a specialized department, go and find your particular procurement policies and follow those. Okay, really, really important. So you've made the decision now to go out to the market and get goods or services from the market. So there's a series of processes that you'll go through. These are some terms that are generally understood internationally. They may be slightly different in the country that you're working in, but generally speaking, what we've got here is at the top with the RFI and the EOI, the request for information, the expression of interest. This means that you don't know a lot about what you want to do. And that's okay. You don't need to go to the market knowing exactly what you want to do with a defined scope and exact plans. You can actually start right at the beginning by going out to the marketplace with a request for information or expression of interest, saying that you've got a problem or an issue that you want to solve, and asking the market, are you interested? If you are, what might your solutions be? And then you can use it as a two-stage process. Once you've got feedback from the market, you can then use that to develop your particular solution. I'm involved in one of these right now, an expression of interest. There's a particular government department here in New Zealand that wants to establish, strangely enough, a major projects leadership academy for large complex construction projects. And they went out to the market late last year. They just went out with an expression of interest, and they basically said, who's out there? What leadership programs do you have? How do they run? What do they cost? And they made it clear that based on the responses they got from that the next step for them would be actually releasing something more detailed. In this case, a tender or request for proposal or request for quotation. So do keep that in mind. It's absolutely okay to go out to the market with these really broad documents to see what the market has and see what availability and what their solutions may be. You might get some really interesting solutions. Once you know exactly what you want, you may issue the following documents: an invitation for bid or a tender, which basically puts a notice out to interested people. Hey, we've got something we want, a good or a service. We'd like you to bid for it, or we'd like you to submit a tender for it. Your terminology may be different depending on the country that you're in. And you may ask, as part of that process, for a formal request for proposal or request for quotation. And in these instances, what you're asking for is an actual proposal from them that if you choose, you can accept, okay? Or you can negotiate it further. So the level of detail you need for these documents is a lot, because nobody's going to give a request for proposal that's accurate or a request for quotation on your loose one paragraph description of your problem or issue. They'll want to see plans and technical specifications in as much detail as possible to be able to give you this. Okay, so these are the sort of level, and it starts here with low level of detail going to a high level of detail this way. Once again, though, as I just said, follow your procurement policies in your organizations. Sometimes you can just go straight out to a particular vendor with a purchase order. If it's a particularly small one, you can just go straight out to a pre-selected vendor or just go out to the local supplier. And a lot of organizations have those policies, like anything under $5,000 or $50,000, you can just go out to your preferred with a purchase order or work order. But a lot of organizations have these rules that if it's like over $50,000 or over $100,000 or whatever, you have to follow these processes, and they will help you, the procurement department. Throughout your life as a project manager, you may get quite good at this if you're doing this all the time and it's a normal part of your particular projects. But for other project managers, they may do this occasionally. So if you're in the latter camp there, doing it occasionally, please use your procurement department to make sure you choose the right document and you run these processes the right way. Typically what you'll do is find some way to notify the market, whether it's through public notice or online or through your company website. You'll give a particular time period for people to respond, couple of weeks, couple of months, whatever it is, and you make it clear all responses must be in on this date. You'll let them know the format that you want that response in as well. Do you want it in written? Do you want it submitted by email? Do you want the price submitted separately from the proposal? That's quite common now, to get the actual solution in one packet and the pricing in another packet, so you can consider the things separately. So you'll explain the whole process as well to people. You'll say, this is the process we're running, because again, one of the things you do need to do is to keep them fair and transparent, so everybody is treated fairly on them. During any process where one of these is open, so those few weeks or few months that it's open, there is a general rule that you must be fair to everybody who wants to submit a response, whether it's an expression of interest or whether it's an RFP, request for proposal. The rule is, and this is captured here it'll be in your procurement policies, it'll be in your national law, but it's also in the PMI Code of Ethics as well, about being completely fair to everybody, not favoring one party over another. So you could break ethics by favoring one party over another. You could breach your organizational policies, but you could also breach laws, relevant laws that govern this sort of thing in your country. So it's really important that everybody, all potential sellers, are given all the procurement documents equally at the same time. They're all allowed to ask questions, and that's why we have these things called bidder conferences. Now, where I live in New Zealand, our bidder conferences have moved away from the everybody gets together on a particular day and time, they can ask questions, and the person issuing the documents will ask them. It tends to be virtual now. You upload your questions. General rule of thumb, if you upload a question or you're going to answer a question, everybody gets the same response. So you might have one vendor who asks a question about something in the plans. You make sure everybody gets the response. There's not many times, except on commercial reasons, that you would only give that response to that one vendor. So it is definitely about being fair. We want to ensure that level playing field where nobody has more information than anyone else. If you give information to one party, you must give it to all parties. That's a rule, okay? This may differ from your actual experience. And I've certainly seen organizations acting, I guess, unethically, or certainly inappropriately, and favoring one particular buyer and giving them the information that they need. I've also seen people end up in court and go to jail for doing that as well. There is a case here in New Zealand recently of a local council manager who issued a large contract for constructing flood protection works, and it went to somebody who was a baker, who was a friend of theirs, who just opened up a company, and they gave them all the information that they needed from all the other bidder responses to actually submit the winning bid. It was obviously a clear case of fraud. But anyway, the point here is, during that process where you've opened it and before you close it, if anybody asks any questions, you've got to give the same information to everybody. So do keep that in mind. Okay, so you've got your documents out there, you're starting to get responses from people. How do you choose the right person? Well, here's something. Don't automatically go for that lowest price. There can be some major issues with going for the lowest price. Here are some of the issues. First up, you could find that the person who gave you the lowest price misread everything. Okay, you go, well, that's not my problem. Well, it is your problem, because if they've misread it and you sign them on, then they go out of business because they just can't meet the terms. Then you're major hit to your project. So make sure the low price is truly understood what you're asking for. Another thing to watch out for the lowest price, there is a habit sometimes, it's not that common, but in the construction world, there is something what we call buying the job and getting them on the variations, basically. So in this case, the seller may spot that the plans that you've issued have some big gray areas in it. And what they'll do is they'll bid low to get the job, because they know that when you clarify those things, they're going to say, oh, that's a change to the contract. And so what they'll be doing is they might be running no profit at all on the main part of the job, but 300% profit on all those variations that you're then obliged to ask for. So do that as well. And the other reason is they may just be incompetent and they've just bid low, but you don't want them going out of business. You really don't. So don't always choose the lowest price. Some organizations will just say, we just choose what's called the lowest price conforming or the lowest price. That's what we look for. But that has some risks to it. In that case, this criteria down here, having some independent estimates of what you're expecting them to come back with will actually tell you whether somebody is outside of that expected range and you need to question them more. So instead of just choosing the lowest price, because price should always be important, here are some other ways to choose the successful vendor or seller. You can have a weighting system, which looks at things like we're going to give weight to their proposed solution, their previous experience, their health and safety record, the staff that they've allocated to it, the references they provide, and we're going to give weighting to the price as well. You should always publish that weighting internally yourself and don't change it, because I have seen some people change that weighting system to get the contract that they really wanted. So have some sort of weighting system on all of those different metrics. There's one that I'm replying to at the moment where they've made it clear, I think it's 30% will be on price and 70% will be on non-price attributes. And they've published that actually out to everybody. So they can't change that. It's like, we know the scores, 30% is on price, 70% on non-price attributes as well. So you could have a weighting system to help you choose. Do take into account previous experience, references, staff assigned. Watch out for the old switcheroo. Seen this happen too many times. The proposal comes in, they promise you the senior experienced staff, they win the job, and then they swap them out for the junior staff. Don't allow that. Make sure there's a clause in the contract that says you're not allowed to swap out any staff without our permission. I do see that happen far too often. You'll have some evaluation criteria yourself, that source selection criteria, which we've already talked about. And it could be that we'll only accept responses from people who have 5 years experience, or we want to be able to see your financial books, or we want to be able to see the CVs of the staff, or we want to see this many references we can talk to. You'll have all of that. It's not uncommon also to not go out to the whole market, but have some sort of screening system beforehand. So you're going out to pre-approved sellers. My company is certainly part of that for a number of government departments. We've already jumped through the hoops. We've shown our financial stability, we've shown our experience, and we've been appointed to pre-approved panels of suppliers. And in that case, government departments can come directly to us or to other members of the supplier panel, because we've already been through a screening system. All the stuff on financial stuff, health and safety record, financial performance. And you could do that with each time too, just have a screening system. We've got all these responses. We won't accept responses from people outside the country, or we won't accept responses from people who haven't been in business for more than 2 years. And you just screen them that way. Then you'll have your rating system. As we've talked about, it's combining all of these together. It's how you make the decision. This is where you add up the individual scores you've given to everybody, the weighting for it, and out of that you should be able to determine the preferred vendor or seller. Now that doesn't mean you automatically go to them. That starts the process of choosing the contract and negotiating the contract with them. But in saying that, I certainly know that my company will respond to certain RFPs, and they make it clear that if they choose you, they're simply going to sign the document and that's it, it's all done. But I know other RFPs that we've responded to, they make it clear that the selected vendor will then be negotiated with for the form of contract as well. So you'll have all of this in your internal procurement policy. So please, I cannot stress that enough, follow that. And look, I will tell a story just to emphasize why. Many years ago, I was asked, and I think I've told the story in one of the other modules, which one I might have told in the scope one. I was asked to come in and audit a really successful project by this local government. It was a very successful project, and they wanted to know why it was so successful. Strange question to ask. But it was to install a third pump into a sewage system. It was a big pump. We're not talking a little pump. We're talking house-size pumping system for a major city sewage system. They already had 2 in place, and the city was growing, and they needed a third. And we're talking massive things. These are massive things. Now, the people building it had built the previous 2, and there was a particular vendor from a particular country, it was Germany, and they had supplied the previous 2 pumping systems, pumping stations, everything about them. And they were working perfectly 10, 20 years later. And the team thought, well, look, let's just go get a third one of those. And they did. They went and got a third one. They procured it. They paid for it. It shipped. They installed. And to this day, well, probably 15 years later, it's probably still working perfectly fine. We discovered something interesting, though, during the process. We discovered that, in this case, the council's insurance policy clearly stated that all large assets over this particular amount, now this was worth several millions of dollars, and I think the insurance policy says something like anything over $100,000 needed to be procured via the formal procurement policy, otherwise it wasn't covered by the insurance. And this was a bit of a clanger, to be honest, because they hadn't followed the procurement policy. Because the procurement policy clearly said anything over $100,000 had to go out to the market to a minimum of 3 potential vendors, and from that, the best one chosen. Now, it may have been that they might have gone out to the market anyway, and they might have chosen that vendor anyway based on past experience, cost, reliability, maintenance, all that anyway, but they didn't. So we had to announce to them and their insurance company it's not covered by insurance. So it's still not covered by insurance, and I know that too. So that's a simple and probably a little bit humorous about somebody's sewerage system not being insured, but it still works fine, by the way. Do follow your procurement practices. Okay, so you're coming to choose the right vendor and the right seller. Now you want to negotiate with them and give them a contract. But I've got some news for you. You don't need to be adversarial. What does this mean? Most contracts that people enter into are what we call adversarial contracts. They set up the buyer and the seller as adversarial against each other. And they actually have clauses in them how you're going to sue each other, or the punitive actions you'll take for non-performance, all of these things. You do have a choice. There is a whole world of collaborative or cooperative contracts out there too, where two parties can agree to trust each other and work what's best for the project and have open book pricing with agreed margins, all of these things in it. But the default that you're probably used to is an adversarial form of contract where power is with the buyer and the seller doesn't have much power at all. Okay, so please, if you have the ability, move from this end of the spectrum to this end of the spectrum. It works so much better, but it's not just easy to do it. You need to change everybody's ways of working. I recently worked with an organization, or two organizations, that for years had a large adversarial services contract between the two, and they wanted to move to a collaborative form of contract because they knew all the benefits. The biggest problem with that was not renegotiating a new collaborative contract, which took several years to do, by the way. It wasn't an easy contract to negotiate. The biggest challenge with that was changing the organizational cultures from sort of a master-slave kind of relationship or buyer and worker kind of relationship. And that still to this day is the biggest challenge, is getting the two organizations to trust each other. So you can go fully collaborative, which is the joint venture. Alliance contracting, I love alliance contracting. I've refused to work under any other form of construction contract other than alliance. I was approached last year to manage a new solar farm installation. I'd done a wind farm many years ago, and I was approached, would I manage the solar farm installation? And the first thing I said is, what form of contract are you using? They said, oh, well, of course we'll be using this one, which is the New Zealand Standard 3910, which is based on the International Engagement for Engineers, IEEE standard. I said, no, I won't work under that one. That's too adversarial. I'll only do the job if you do it as an alliance. They said, no, we're going to do it under this. So I didn't work for them. So you've got alliancing, you've got the whole new engineering contract, NEC, new engineering contract, FIDIC, early contractor involvement. These are all more collaborative than typical one. And here in New Zealand, we call it NZS 3910. It's an Australian New Zealand standard. So if you're watching this in Australia, you'll have your own version of that, but it's heavily based on the IEEE standard for conditions for the engagement of engineers to a contract or something like that. You'll have your own form of it, but you'll notice it because it'll give the power to the buyer instead of all these punishment clauses and termination clauses and suing clauses and things like that. So please move to more collaborative forms of contract. So here are some of the advantages and disadvantages. So adversarial forms of contract can cause suspicion and distrust because one party thinks it's going to be ripped off by the other party or doesn't trust the other party. It is motivated by best for self, like what's our profit margin? How do we get more money out of this? It's typically given on a single project basis, so there's no long-term relationship built. You get independent teams in each contracting party that don't really cooperate because they've got their own culture, their own ways of working, and they know that they'll say goodbye sooner or later. Communications are guarded. Nobody wants to say how much money you're actually making or what the real problem is in case you get blamed and sued for it. And there is that inherent fear of reprisal that we are going to be sued. Lawyers are going to turn up. We're going to be punished. Duplication of effort because they're checking the contract, you're checking the contract, they're doing their finances, you're checking their finances, they're doing their quality inspections, you're doing your quality inspections. And the risk is generally with the seller, the person providing the goods or services. And the risk is also, but they build that pricing, they build that risk into their pricing too, by the way. Don't think they haven't built that risk in. So if you've given them a job for $1 million, they're probably thinking they can deliver for 800,000, and they just know there's risk and fighting in that, so they've added on another 200,000 somewhere in their pricing for that. Collaborative contracts are based on mutual trust. In fact, one of the clauses in a typical alliance contract is we give up the right to sue each other. But actually, you have to sign that statement. We cannot sue each other. So you spend time getting to trust each other, getting to know each other. You work for what's best for the project, not what's best for you. You've got to have support systems in place for that. You like have open price books and things like that. No recriminations. Then people work with what's best for the project. The best project I've ever worked on was a 2.5-year large-scale urban redevelopment project for a local council. It was an alliance project. We brought that project in early and $1.5 million under budget on a $20 million budget. We delivered much more than was expected because it was an alliance and everybody on board worked for what was best for the project. You'll get joint project teams who come together to establish their own cultural identity and their own ways of working because they actually join together. It doesn't become buyer and seller, it's the project team. Open communications, that's what mutual trust is built upon. It's usually done for more than one project, so you establish that long-term relationship. You get access to each other's resources. So it's not, these are our machines or our people, they're not the project's machines and people. Risk is shared jointly. So you'll often have something like a maximum fixed price, but if you come in under, you both share in it like 50-50. And if you go over that, you both have to pay. So risk is shared jointly. And open book finances. So you might have a pricing model that says, we'll pay you what you have to pay to get the job done, plus an agreed margin on top. You might, say I've worked on one where it was 17% was the margin on top, 10% for overhead and 7% for profit. And everybody could see exactly what was spent. It was all absolutely clear. So there are definitely advantages to going collaborative. But as I said, it's not just a simple shift because organizational culture is the biggest challenge here. And I've been on one alliance contract where they actually spent 3 months before signing it, getting the teams to work together just to see if they could work together, because that's the biggest challenge. Okay, so you've chosen the type of contract. More generically, you can go with a fixed price contract, which it favors the buyer because the risk is now with the seller. They have to deliver the goods or services at that price. It's fixed price. The buyer doesn't have to worry about it. So that's great from the buyer's point of view. From the seller, it's like, but they've built that pricing in. By the way, that risk is already priced in. At the other end of the spectrum, every seller would love a time and materials contract. Just keep working and we'll keep paying. Of course, it favors the seller. The buyer just has to keep paying. No maximum, just keep paying. These can be useful for like emergency works or very short, complex works that aren't really going to cost you too much. And negotiating a big fixed price contract just doesn't warrant it. So small amounts or emergency works, time and materials works fine. Apart from that, generally not. And in the middle, you've got the cost reimbursable contract or the cost plus contract, which basically says, as I said before, we'll pay you what you actually spend. We'll pay you plus that, plus a margin or fixed fee on top of it. Plus, we'll probably agree on a maximum spend, and if we bring it in under that. So that $20 million urban redevelopment project, the main contractor was entitled to, it was actually generous for them. They were actually entitled to 70% of the underspend. So they actually took home $1 million bonus. I remember having to approve that invoice, $1 million, because we came in, $1.5 million under budget. They were actually entitled to $1 million underspend. So you all have these sorts of things around it as well. So you do have a choice, and always think about what's going to get this job done best. And it's usually going to be more collaborative, open book, those sorts of things. But sometimes a fixed price does actually work too, if you're prepared to accept that that the seller giving you the price has built the risk into that pricing. Okay. So you've got your contract signed, lawyers have probably been involved, procurement department's definitely been involved, you've been involved as a subject matter expert, the person responsible for delivering the overall project or the program. The next thing you've got to do is, once they're signed, you don't ignore them. Nope, you read them all the time. You need to read them again and again and again. You need to know your contracts better than the lawyer who charged you far too much to help you put them together. You need to know them. I got caught out just last week, actually, on a contract that was offered to some people. I was part of the development of this contract, and it took about 5 weeks to develop the contract, and it was offered to people. And they wanted me to walk through it with them. And I was like, yeah, I know this contract inside out. And I was sitting down with them just 2 weeks ago, walking them through every part of this contract. I got to one clause and they said, could you just explain this? And I went, yep. And I read it and explained it. And as I explained, I went, oh, heck. Oh, wow, I didn't think about that scenario. So we've just been chatting over the last 2 weeks. It's like, well, as it's written, this could actually happen. So you do find those sorts of things, but do read your contracts more than once, regularly. I know on big projects, I'll pull them out every month, just reread them again so I understand performance and termination and all of those things. Every single change that you make to that contract must be in writing. No exceptions ever. If you change that contract, it's in writing. Not just emails too, actually addendums or formally changes or new versions signed and executed by everybody. Remember, any mistakes or shortcuts that you make are going to end up in court, and that's the way you need to look at it. In fact, that reminds me of some advice I got given by my first boss many years ago, 30 years ago, actually. My first boss, Paul Arnold, that's his name. If you know Paul Arnold, say hi from me. I don't know where he is now. I'll have to look him up on LinkedIn. And I worked at a local council here in New Zealand. And Paul was a great guy, and he always gave me this great piece of advice that I remember even today. He said, every decision you make, Sean, you need to assume there's a high chance it's going to end up in court at some point in the future. So document it. It was a great piece of advice, and it's one that I've kept with me for the last 30 years. Wow, that's a long time. 30 years. 29 years to be exact. It'll be 29 years right now. Wow. Okay, I'm just having a moment. Back into it though. So yeah, please make sure you change all contracts in writing. No handshakes, no verbals. They can start with verbals, but they've got to end up in writing. And all the contracts technically have to be closed. Did you know that? Most aren't. They just sort of stop. You pay them, they do some work in that. But it's always good practice to do an exchange of emails at the end of it to say, look, we've paid all your invoices, you've done all the work. Thank you. Terms of the contract are met, and now it's closed. Normal conditions of closure, because there can be abnormal conditions for closure, like non-performance or force majeure or something like that, in which case you will document that. But normally contracted closure, yeah, absolutely fine. Just send each other an email saying, and it may require a bit of negotiation at the end too. It's like to formally close it. You may say, look, you do that, we'll pay you this and we'll just call it quits. That's absolutely fine too. But that nice little formal closure email or letter or exchange of letters, just saying, yep, everything's been paid for, everything's been done, we're all good. Just a nice little record to have for the future. So there we are. But contract control actually should be done by both the buyer and the seller too, by the way. It's a process that you do constantly. Everybody's reading them, those performance metrics, the delivery criteria, the non-performance determination clauses. They're always checking were the goods and services delivered as per the agreed plans and scopes, were they delivered on time, were the right amounts invoiced and paid, were any additional conditions of the contract met. Everybody should be doing this. Because too many times I see a contract signed, then people assume they remember what was in it, and both parties just go, yeah, let's just continue on handshakes and verbals and that. And sooner or later, you often find that if they actually read the contract, they may find that neither party is sticking to what it's supposed to do. And that's fine, by the way, but change the contract to reflect that. You don't want to let it get out of hand. Now, from time to time, there's a possibility that you are going to get into an argument. You're absolutely going to get into an argument. You're going to get into a contractual dispute, particularly with adversarial forms of contract. Now, there's a general process that your contract will probably set out for resolving disputes, but this is the general process. It starts here at the top and goes down to the bottom. The bottom is where the lawyers get involved. The first step you should take is negotiation. This is where each of the parties to the contract comes together and they try and work things out themselves. Okay? It's negotiation. Mediation is where the parties say, look, we can't quite agree. We're going to bring in a referee, so to speak, who's going to help us agree. Okay? It's mediation. The next one down the list is arbitration. And this is where the parties will actually let that third party make a binding or non-binding decision. So if it's a binding decision, they both sign documents saying we agree with the outcome of what this arbiter or arbitration expert says. So we've worked through negotiation, mediation, arbitration. If none of these work, you end up with litigation. And this is when you end up in your court system. And look, the only winners here are the lawyers with the fees they charge. And I say that if you're a lawyer watching this, yeah, I'm mocking you and your fees. I am mocking you and your fees. I was talking with the lawyer. I was engaging a lawyer for the last project I worked on, this large thing of these two companies trying to work together collaboratively. And we knew we needed the lawyers the whole time. And at one point, I asked the lawyers, hey, listen, I need a price estimate. How much are you going to charge us? And I always remember the answer I got from them. This was about a year and a half ago. They said, oh, Sean, giving you a fee estimate is kind of like walking in the fog looking for street lights. And they said the fog is dense. You can see the next street light clearly, and the one after that sort of in the distance, but you can't see anything beyond that. And that's why it's so difficult to give you a fee estimate. Now, I'm going to use that because that is a way to say, oh, we don't know, we're just going to keep charging you. Lucky for me as a project manager, the companies didn't really mind about the price. They just wanted to do it right. But yeah, I do remember that from lawyers. So do try and avoid that if at all possible. Try and go through negotiation, mediation, and arbitration first. And then litigation is absolutely a last resort. So there we are. That's my high-level introduction to procurement and contract management. As I said at the beginning, it needs to be high level because you're going to have your own procurement policies in your organization, and you're going to be subject to the laws of the country that you're working in, or even international laws as well. So this is just a general introduction to the high-level processes. So have you been paying attention? Here we are. We've got some words on the left-hand side, some definitions on the right-hand side. Let's see if you've been paying attention. This is quite specialized, but if you do recall the slide, NZS 3910 or the IEEE standard conditions for engagement of an engineer to the contract, or whatever it is, what's that? Is it A, B, C, D, or E? Hopefully you answered D. A standard, very standard, but adversarial form of contract. It's a very widely used form of contract internationally in its different forms. I also know companies that take it and make it more adversarial to favor them as well. What is arbitration? Is it A, B, C, or E? Hopefully you answered B. When two or more parties in a contract are having a disagreement and agree to let a third party make the decision, binding or non-binding. They'll make all those agreements up front. What is a fixed price contract? Is it A, C, or E? Hopefully in this instance, you went A, a contract where most of the risk is with the seller of the goods or services, not with the buyer. But remember, they've priced that risk in there. And the last two, make or buy analysis and collaborative contract, C and E. Hopefully you answered make or buy analysis is E, an early decision in the procurement process to decide whether you procure from external sources or do it yourself. And a collaborative contract is a procurement contract model based on openness, trust, and transparency, the one that I personally favor a lot now. So there we are. Quickly recapping, please always follow your organization's procurement policies. Get specialist support if you need it. Don't try and do it yourself, because if you get it wrong, it's going to backfire badly. But you should be involved in everything. And keep in mind, you don't need to choose adversarial forms of contract. You can go to more collaborative forms of contract. They are a lot more successful. Please read all of your contracts often and be fair and transparent in all of your negotiations. So there we are. That's the introduction to procurement and contract management. Once again, thank you for your attention. I'm grateful for it. And as with all of the other modules, if you've got any questions at all, drop me an email and I will get back to you just as fast as I can. But yeah, thank you very much, and have a great day.